The Shroud of Padre Pio. The saint wiped his face with a handkerchief, and later an image appeared on it. A Shroud of Turin expert says the image is an acarapita, which means an icon made not by human hands. The story begins in February 1968 and concerns Francesco Cavici of Conegliano, Italy, who was one of the spiritual sons of Padre Pio. Francesco, with his wife Carla and some friends, drove to San Giovanni Rotondo from their home in northern Italy. Francesco wished to speak with Padre Pio privately for advice, but upon their arrival they learned that the Padre was not feeling well and had to remain in his cell in the monastery. They decided to stay in San Giovanni for a few days anyway before returning home. On the day they were set to leave, Francesco approached the superior of the friar to see if he would ask Padre Pio on his behalf and tell him the Padre's reply. "Why didn't you ask him himself?" said the superior. "Soon he will be coming down to hear confessions." Then the superior pointed to an elevator and told Francesco to wait there. Francesco nervously waited alone before the elevator door, worried about how to approach Padre Pio with his question, knowing that the monk had no time to waste in idle chatter. Due to his nervousness, Francesco's hands started sweating, so he took out a handkerchief from his pocket and held it tightly to absorb the moisture. Meanwhile, the elevator descended, and when he saw the door start to open, he knelt in front of it. There was Padre Pio, right before him, offering his mittened hand to be kissed. Then the Padre said with a smile, "Son, if you don't get up, how will I get past you?" Francesco got up, and as he did, Padre Pio saw the handkerchief he was holding, and reaching out, the Padre took it. "How wonderful," Francesco thought. "When he returns it, I will have a precious relic." Walking in with the friar, he told him all about his problem, and as usual, Padre Pio immediately gave Francesco a precise answer. They arrived at the entrance to the room where the men were waiting for confession. The crowd began pressing around the saint, trying to kiss his hand or touch him, and Francesco was engulfed in the rush, forgetting all about the handkerchief. But Padre Pio had not forgotten it. He turned towards Francesco, showing him the cloth. Then he unfolded it, wiped his face with it as if sweating, although it was winter, and staring into Francesco's eyes, he handed it back to him with a tender gesture. Deeply moved, Francesco understood that he had just been given a great gift. At that time, Francesco didn't notice any usual markings on the handkerchief, only that it was wrinkled. But because it had been held by Padre Pio and touched his face, it became an exceptional relic. When Francesco returned to the hotel, he told his wife what happened, and they were both overcome with joy. After the Cavicis made the journey back home to Conegliano, they continued to regard it with devotion. Francesco began to carry it with him, like a good luck charm, carrying it in his jacket pocket when not showing it to his friends and telling his story. Over time, it became dark and dirty. The 23rd of September 1969 was the first anniversary of Padre Pio's passing, and the Cavicis went on a pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo with some friends. They traveled overnight by bus, and after arriving early the next morning, Francesco became tired. He prayed at the saint's tomb, went upstairs to the church, and sat alone in a pew to get some rest. In a short time he fell asleep and began to dream about Padre Pio. In his dream, Padre Pio was at the altar of the church, and then walked towards Francesco. He was smiling, and when he reached Francesco, opened his habit and showed him the wound on his chest. "Touch it," Padre Pio said. Francesco was afraid touching the wound would hurt the saint, but Padre Pio insisted. So he put his finger in the wound, and after he withdrew, his fingers were covered with a white sticky film. A handkerchief appeared out of nowhere, and he used it to clean his fingers of the white substance, and black marks were left on the cloth. Then on his fingertips he noticed an image of Padre Pio. He looked around for the friar, but the friar was gone. At that moment, Francesco's wife woke him, telling him he looked very tired. He told her now he felt rested and was going outside to refresh himself. On the courtyard in front of the friary there was a small fountain, which has since been moved elsewhere. People would go there to quench their thirst because it was known as the water of Padre Pio. Francesco rinsed his hands and face in front of the fountain and took out a handkerchief to dry himself. Inadvertently, instead of taking out a clean cloth, he took out the handkerchief that of Padre Pio had given him. A woman nearby noticed how dirty it was and asked Francesco if he would like her to wash it for him. Seeing how dirty it appeared, he said, "Yes, let's wash it." As soon as he spoke those words, he marveled, because every time his wife wanted to wash it in the past, he would prevent her. The woman poured water on it from a bottle, and Francesco rinsed it in his hands. Suddenly the woman began screaming, "Padre Pio! Padre Pio!" "Where?" he asked. "There in the handkerchief," she continued shouting. Others rushed over, and Francesco became frightened. He remembered the day before when a lady shouted in the church that she could see Padre Pio by the altar. She was taken off to the police station by the carabinieri. Quickly he put the handkerchief back in his pocket and walked away, saying, "There's nothing to see." He took refuge in the church for a while and returned to his hotel. But truly there was something to see. Francesco noticed dark marks on the handkerchief like those he had seen in his dream. They appeared to resemble a face, but were not clear enough to be sure. I understood, Francesco thought, that something mysterious happened with that handkerchief. Not wanting to deceive himself, he said nothing to anyone, not even his wife. He spread it out on a dressing table so it could dry. During Mass the next morning, he prayed to Padre Pio, asking for help in understanding what the marks on the handkerchief meant, and whether he should tell his wife Carla. Suddenly, he could smell the aroma of a strong perfume, and that led him to believe that Padre Pio gave him permission to talk to his wife. He returned to the hotel after Mass and told his wife everything. In their room, he picked up the cloth and held it up before both of their eyes, saying, "What do you see?" "The face of Jesus," she answered. "What Jesus?" "It's Padre Pio," he retorted. "No, for me it is the face of Jesus," she insisted. Then he realized that his wife was looking at the opposite side of the same handkerchief. On one side was the face of Padre Pio, having the same lines he noticed the night before, only now the face became clearer and more detailed. The image on the other side looked more like Jesus. Confused and frightened, Francesco was uncertain what to do about it. He consulted with some religious, including his bishop, who were amazed upon seeing it and advised him to keep it hidden. The cause for Padre Pio's beatification had just begun, and they worried that this might lead to fanaticism, harming the cause. Francesco obeyed and kept silent for many years. Finally, in 1999, the beatification of Padre Pio was announced, and Francesco was free to share it with others. He and his wife made a small shrine in their home, where every year hundreds of faithful came to venerate the cloth. The walls of the shrine are decorated by many ex votos in honor of graces received. Francesco passed away in 2005 and his widow Carla in 2009. From then on, the handkerchief was consigned to an undisclosed friary. The community of friars decided to have the image examined by an expert, Professor Giulio Fanti of the University of Padua. He is considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the Shroud of Turin and other images of mysterious origin, and called Acheropita, or not made by human hands. According to the Professor Fanti, the images on the handkerchief are like those on the shroud. They have not been painted or drawn, and no trace of pigment or color can be found. There is an image on one side of the cloth that resembles Padre Pio, and on the other side it resembles Jesus. The image of Jesus is fainter, but one can discern on the right eye a cut as if from a lash, like that of the Shroud of Turin. The conclusion, says Professor Fanti, is irrefutable. It is impossible that these images be of human work.